Instagram.
Hello, YouTube and Facebook. Welcome to the weekly pet roundup where we talk about newest news in the pet industry. And today we're
Right.
talking about the new CDC guidelines for vaccination of rabies.
Yeah. So, okay, over here on Insta, I did invite you, by the way, on Instagram.
I'm watching you. I'm going to send you some love here.
Okay. So, we are talking about the new CDC guidelines for vaccinations in dogs. They're going to be effective August 1st. And I just felt like, no, that's not you.
No, that's not me.
Invite. Okay. I invited you again. Let's see if. But thank you guys so much for joining us, whether you're on Instagram or we also have like Facebook and YouTube going over here. Because even though you may not be traveling abroad or thinking of adopting a dog from abroad, like these are still important conversations to have so that we all know and understand what's going on. And can we get you in here?
Yeah, I requested you.
Okay,
I
yeah,
just
I
sent a
know.
request.
Oh, it says you're unable to join. I hit yes, and then it said you're unable. Let me try again. I
Okay,
would
yeah, no,
love
she
to.
accepted me. Yeah, you accepted me. I'm good.
Okay. All right. So, oh, and hey, Dr. Kosher, I would love to know what your opinions are on the new CDC guidelines because I'm kind of going off of, as far as a veterinary perspective, Dr. Will Falconer is who I was reading his information about this topic on the new CDC guidelines. And the reason that I went back to Dr. Will Falconer is because he was actually hired back in, like, I want to say the 80s. Hawaii hired him to evaluate their rabies protocol because they are, Hawaii, obviously being islands. The Dr. Kosher says, "What a pain in the expletive." Being islands, they eradicated rabies, and they want to keep it that way. Interestingly, because I guess it can be transmitted to mongoose, and then it's like you're not going to get rid of it at that point. So, anyway, Isabel, thank you for joining me all the way
It's my
from
pleasure.
Seattle.
Thank you for having me
And
every
your
week.
hair is down and curled, and I love it.
It's the humidity, the Seattle humidity.
And Jay is here too. Hi.
Jay,
I
how are
know. I
you?
can't wait to see you next month, Jay. So yes, the Seattle humidity that
Yeah, no, it's beautiful.
I would not have thought they had a whole lot of humidity there.
Well, it's beautiful. It's actually beautiful. We've had really wonderful weather. I have no complaints. Seattle's fantastic. It's my first time here. I am actually in the lounge, so if you hear loud jazz music, I am in the lounge at the Sheraton, and they really like jazz around here, and sometimes it gets a little loud. So my apologies ahead of time, but this is a really cool topic to talk about because it already started some really good discussions when we announced the topic last
It
week.
did.
And it does kind of impact a lot of people, even though I feel like for the vast majority, this is kind of something that will not impact your daily life.
Yeah.
Even my sister who travels back and forth with her dog from Spain is not impacted at all. So it's not, a bad thing necessarily. It does complicate things for rescues, for breeders, and for those who do travel with their pets to high risk, what the CDC terms high risk countries.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, we should just, or I want to read, I know I've talked about this before, like on the podcast and maybe on some of our lives, I'm not sure. Rabies is the worst. Like, I could not imagine having to experience or watch somebody experience rabies. I couldn't imagine having to watch an animal experience rabies. And even though I know that, like raccoons or whatever, like it still happens in some wildlife animals, I still, even in a wild animal, I would not want to see it because it's so devastating. So I just want to kind of get that out of the way and make sure everybody understands that we are not advocating for just letting these viruses run wild. Like, please no, rabies is horrible and like 99% fatal, and certainly something that our public health officials have more of a concern about humans contracting it than animals. I mean,
Of course.
obviously, animals can spread it to humans, but that's the primary concern here, is not the well-being of the animals per se, but the well-being of humans. So that's something I think we all need to understand as well when we are reading and evaluating these rules, regulations, guidelines, because it all is in the best interest, in their perspective, the best interest for humans involved.
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Kosher says, it is a big concern for those who show dogs between the US and Canada. That's actually something Dr. Falconer brought up as well. Think of people bringing 5 to 10 dogs across the border for a weekend of events. The cost of health certificates is a serious concern. And these are obviously healthy and vaccinated dogs. I totally get that. And that's actually the exact same point that Dr. Falconer brought up. What I was reading from him is pretty much that, like the low risk countries like Canada, like New Zealand, Australia, that those
Europe, all of Europe.
Europe, yeah, that he really feels like that part of this needs to be readdressed. But I feel like I'm taking over, so please go.
No, not at all. I just want to shout out to my son and my husband who are watching. Noah, how come you're not at school right now?
What?
Hi, Nanny. They're on Facebook, I believe.
Oh,
So
nice.
hi guys, thanks for joining. Yeah, I mean, I think that this
Oh,
is
no,
one
I
of
think
those
they're on
things.
YouTube.
Oh, YouTube? Oh, both.
I think so.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I think that this is one of those things where we need to set standards, but obviously when you set standards, you kind of, for lack of a better word, screw over a group. And there are over 100 high risk countries or political, what do they call them, units, that are listed as high risk, and none of these are really a surprise. So, like the fact that we are obviously setting a standard for some countries where the standard of care for pets is lower than ours makes perfect sense. But of course, then when you're just making it more difficult for people from countries that are not considered high risk, then it's kind of two different. We're talking about two different concerns. We're talking about two different effects of this. I'm all about, I lived abroad and I've seen in Latin America the standard of care of pets. And I do think that we needed to do something where, we're translating vaccination records. We're making sure that our officials are empowered to say this pet doesn't look right or whatever. Rabies is terrifying. The way that rabies works is that the host actually, the pathogen makes them want to spread the virus. So that is really scary. So that's why we're talking about something that's very spreadable, that's very dangerous, that's zoonotic, so it affects more than just the dogs. And so obviously we need to be very, very cautious. And yes, it is going to be a higher cost of doing business for people who show dogs, for breeders. Rescues are going to be affected. There is an age minimum now that, like there's age minimums that are going to be affecting, especially like a breeder, right? Like if you can't bring a dog in until after 6 months now, breeders are going to be affected by that. And pet parents are going to be affected by that if they were hoping for, a puppy that they get before the socialization period or whatever. So there's a lot of key aspects to this that affect people. I'm always for any kind of control that keeps us safe from rabies. So that's my stance on that. Obviously, if it were certain countries that are safe, that had to go through the more rigorous controls, then I'd have more to say about that. But it just reading the list of the high risk countries, I mean, it does make sense. Like it is, more developing nations that may not have even like pet care on their radar for the most part. These are not countries that are exporting quality puppies.
Yeah.
These are countries that, are at risk for rabies there and for bringing it to us.
Yeah, so let me see if I can pull up. The requirements are dogs must be at least 6 months, 180 days of age at the time of entry into the United States. By the way, hi, Amanda. Thank you for joining us. They have to be examined by a licensed veterinarian in the country of export and found to be in good health and free of infectious disease, internal parasites, and external parasites. They have to be vaccinated for rabies by a licensed veterinarian at least 30 days before the date of entry into the United States. Dogs must be at least 84 days of age at the time of vaccination. The vaccination must be current at the time of arrival. 2 and 3 year vaccinations are acceptable. However, if the expiration date of the vaccination is not available, a 1-year validity is applied. And that again kind of goes back to what you were saying about records being translated into a language that, so if we're talking about animals coming into the US, having records translated into English,
Yeah,
considering
I
that
mean,
is
think about
our,
like
yeah,
Arabic, Asian languages, we wouldn't be able to, I mean, I think that's pretty much something that's been standard, I'm assuming, before
yeah.
this, but it is
Well,
definitely important.
and I mean, I know when I adopted Kim, first of all, they didn't give me any records. I had to ask for records. And when I got her records, they were in Spanish and I couldn't read
Where'd she
them.
come from?
And my
Where'd she
vet
come
couldn't
from?
read them. Mexico.
Oh, got it. Okay. I didn't know Kim was one of ours. I'm
She
just kidding. I'm not
is.
Mexican, but
My
like I thought
daughter
it.
is Latina. That's why.
Yeah. Oh,
um, they have to be vaccinated for distemper, hepatitis, parvovirus, parainfluenza, and leptospirosis, DHLPP, within 12 months of entry into the United States. So once they're here, we got to load them up. Um, accompanied by a health and rabies vaccination certificate issued in English by a veterinarian with a valid license to practice veterinary medicine in the country of export. And then they're giving example certificates and everything that the certificate has to include, which, by the way, when we did translate Kim's records, half of this information was not on them, including the date of the record was not on
right.
it. So the fact that, I mean, when we are, my best hope really is like maybe it's going to push for some sort of standardization in these recording practices, but again, there is still some things like Dr. Kosher was mentioning and Dr. Will Falconer, who I'll quote him in a bit, that still need to be addressed, I think. And then they have to be accompanied by a valid import permit issued by APHIS Animal Care. The exceptions are dogs imported for resale, research purposes, or veterinary treatment and subsequent resale are exempt from these requirements. An exemption to the age requirement exists for the import of dogs into Hawaii as long as they are imported from the British Isles, Australia, New Zealand, and Guam. And the reason that I brought up the exemption is because of exactly what you just mentioned, Isabel, because if they can create exemptions like this, where they are calling out specific countries like Australia and New Zealand for these types of it, then why can't we do the same for instance, in the case of Dr. Kosher, going into Canada with 10 dogs for a weekend for a I don't know,
Dog
some sort
show.
of show or agility or whatever the heck it is. And what, why can't we also include certain exemptions for things like that? Because in my mind, and I know we don't talk, we like intentionally don't bring up or talk about politics, but it is sadly like all a political game where, you know, if we call out any country for any reason, whether it's a bad list or a good list, it's like, oh, you're racial profiling for some reason, somehow, some right. Like, so, like, if we're going to call it out for an exemption in one way, why not in another way? I don't know.
Well,
Maybe that's just me.
going back to Kim, Mexico is not on the list of high risk. So, um, a dog coming in from Mexico could come from El Salvador, who is on the list. Could come in
Yeah,
from Belize, also on the list. So it does get a little hairy.
it
Absolutely.
does. Yeah.
because Kim would have been able to come in no problems, but somebody that a dog that they rescue in El Salvador or somewhere in Central America would not be allowed. Colombia's on the list, Ecuador's on the list, Brazil, Bolivia is on the list, Argentina is not on the list. So again, it's like these more countries with higher socioeconomic levels are not being listed, whereas those with
Mhm.
lower socioeconomic levels are being listed. Which again, yeah, like I agree with you. It kind of it makes me question stuff because I mean, I live in El Paso right next to Mexico, and a lot of our residents go to Mexico for veterinary care because it's so much more affordable. And I know
Yeah.
that the standards in many cases are just as good. I have a friend whose dog had a broken leg, and they're from Juarez, so they took the dog that they rescued in El Paso to Juarez to their veterinarian. The dog got great care. She had like a great little splint that they put on her, and she was like a little York. She is a little Yorkie. She's adorable, and so she got great care. But like that's Juarez, a big city. Like in rural Mexico, are we gonna have these standards that they think they have? No. I guess it's because it's on the border that they've kind of like not included it in the high risk. But I would say that Mexico is just as high risk as a lot of these other countries because of the lack of education, lack of resources, you know. So again, it's kind of like these lists are kind of arbitrary sometimes. Sometimes they're absolutely on point. Um, I, I feel like at the end of the day, those that are worried about rescues, bringing pets in, like I know that we bring a lot of pets in, and I know San Juan, Puerto Rico, or like Puerto Rico is an American, it's American, so
Mhm.
obviously they are considered American, but they are coming. We get a lot of rescues from San Juan or Puerto Rico. We get a lot of rescues from South Korea, not on the list. We get a lot of rescues from like the Caribbean islands, like the French Antilles, St. Thomas, St. Bart's. Well, not St. Bart's. They have great pet care there, but like I've seen them come in from St. Martin. I've seen them come in from the Caribbean, and a lot of these countries are not on here on the high risk list. China, parts of China are on the list, but like Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan are not on the list. So there are again, it's like depending on where you are, you can bring the rescues in. I don't feel like the majority of the list is incorrect because again, like having lived abroad, I know that not all dogs need to be brought in without extra safety protocols, especially for rabies. Um, but there are some that make you go, like as with all laws, some of this makes you go, and it does make it complicated for some people. But I do think that it's like very niche. I think who is really going to be affected by this is very niche.
Mhm.
As far as exporting from the U.S. elsewhere, that's when it does get complicated. My husband actually just posted, it's so funny, Chris. I was about to get there. The military is especially affected by this. All the various places we go, and quite a few soldiers and Marines will adopt in those locations and try to bring them back to the States. Yes, when we leave, when we go abroad, we are eventually going to come back, and that's going to be more than 6 months, right? Like Americans deploy, like families PCSing to other stations outside the US are going to come back. It's going to be more than that 6 month period where they're like they have to jump through some more hoops. So that's going to
Mhm.
affect the families that go abroad, and then it's also going to affect the soldiers that want to bring pets back. For example, my dog Radar, may he rest in peace, was from South Korea. He was a Italian mascot that came back with my husband. So yeah, these do affect the military. I don't know again if there's going to be exceptions or exemptions for them. That is something that's not discussed, but it
Mhm.
definitely needs to be addressed because the last thing we want, especially coming from I'm a military spouse, so um, the last thing we want is to give military families any more reason to abandon their pets before they go abroad or to not bring pets back that they're attached to um, when they come back from a deployment, for example. I mean, pets, dogs in a deployment can really be such a huge help for our soldiers. And if
Mhm.
they fall in love with that dog and want to bring it back, we should do everything we can to bring that soldier's pet back.
So I cannot remember his name, but I did have somebody on who on
Yeah,
the podcast, you might have too, had him on. That's what they do is try to get, well, not these types of dogs that soldiers want to bring back
yeah,
home with them, but the specifically
canine. Yeah,
military
yep, yep,
canines,
yep. Yes,
because that is a mess in and of itself, which makes me
yes,
think like
yeah.
they're not gonna, why are they gonna care about bringing personal
Agreed.
animals
Agreed. So yeah, the working
back?
dogs, the military working dogs are completely. I think Obama did do something during his administration that made them like a little more protected, but realistically, it's not enough. Still,
Yeah,
they the
they
Obama
found
changed it.
loopholes.
Obama changed it so that they could bring them back, but then once they bring them back, like there's no support for them, there's no like money for them, there's not like the military doesn't support them in any way. Like they'll transport them back.
So,
Before
yeah, what
then,
happens now, so what they used to be equipment. So they would just leave
exactly.
equipment. And so they're not equipment any longer, so they're supposed to come back.
But that's it.
But the loophole is that they will just leave them on some sort of land that is like embassy or base. So it's technically US soil, and they just leave them there. So they're still not getting the care. They're still not, and
No.
it's really a nasty,
And
nasty thing.
even if you can bring them back, there's no support for them. These dogs are like
Right,
military working dogs. These are dogs
right.
that have seen combat. These are dogs with like fear. These are dogs with trauma.
Hmm.
These are dogs with physical ailments that
Yeah,
are caused by their service to the military. So
yeah,
yeah, there's not a lot of help for them already. So the last thing, these rescues that are rescuing these dogs and bringing them back and giving them the repair that they need, right?
yeah,
The last thing they need is to jump through more hoops with vaccinations and like
yeah.
with requirements. But at the end of the day, like these things are meant to just keep everybody safe. So it's
Hmm.
inevitably, I mean, and this happens in everything, right? This happens with vaccinations for us as humans. Like we are required to get these things to go back to work. Some people, like in the military, COVID, they have to be vaccinated in order to work. And that became a huge issue for those that didn't want to. And it's one of those blanket things that we do, right, to protect the masses.
Hmm.
And not everybody's going to be happy with them. Like that is just
Yeah,
the nature of the beast. Like not everybody's going to be happy for it. Some people are going to be expected negatively. Some people are going to be really upset about it. And then other people are going to benefit from it because they're not going to die from rabies. So, you know what I mean? Like it's one of those things that like it's part of being in a community and living in a not living off the grid. It's part of using public transport, using airports, using these things. Like a lot of these things just come with the territory of living and existing in this world in which we live, and there's not much we can do about it. But there are obviously questions that rescue should be asking, that people who are crossing the borders, groups, organizations should be lobbying for exceptions for certain groups. I'm
hmm,
sure that the military working dog organizations, there are many, um, they're going to be, kind of affected by this. Maybe they can lobby, but all these organizations have such few resources already that it's kind of something they're just going to have to adopt or
hmm.
adapt to.
Yeah.
Um, Frankly, so Healthy Dog Workshop says, frankly, I have more of a problem with Southern U.S. rescues bringing dogs to the Northeast with heartworm than international with rabies. Honestly, uh, heartworm is everywhere though. Like so, like I feel like rabies is it's not apples to apples in my opinion. Not to say that your opinion is wrong, but like to me, it's not apples to apples because the warmer it gets, the more mosquitoes are everywhere, and the more risk everybody has of heartworm and um, you know rabies is just one of those things that's zoonotic, so it affects a much greater group if it were to spread. There goes our wildlife, there goes our pets, there goes our people. Rabies is just a very special kind of evil, in my
Oh my
opinion.
gosh.
Yeah,
Right?
it's
I
just
know.
another level.
I know. And so Dr. Falconer, in his email that he sent out last week, says rabies can have a long incubation period depending on where the victim was bitten by a rabid animal. So no symptoms might show during this period between the rabid bite and the virus reaching the brain and causing typical signs. Um, so that's also something like I guess he felt to
Yeah,
to mention as far as like this waiting
That the dog,
period or this
yeah,
incubation like
and that the dog
period
has
for.
to appear healthy. Like, I mean, that's never a guarantee, right? Like, a dog appearing healthy does not mean that he won't, or a human appearing healthy now doesn't mean that they're not going to be unhealthy tomorrow or showing symptoms tomorrow. So it's kind of like,
Yeah.
and
So
then
go ahead.
no, please go ahead.
No, I wanted to read part of his email because of the lack of understanding that people have because and I was trying to find it. I thought I had it pulled up. There was something somewhere on the CDC website that said vaccinate or titer. And for some reason I can't find it again, but I
I
remember
didn't see that
seeing that
anywhere.
the other day. But he says, so Dr. Will Falconer in his email says, an impactful lack of understanding. There's unfortunately a glaring misunderstanding of duration of immunity embodied in the passage from the new rules published May 8th. And then he quotes from the new rules where it says, if your dog's rabies vaccination expires before you get your dog a booster vaccine, your dog must have another titer drawn at least 30 days after booster vaccination to be eligible for importation. And then he says we have to call BS on expires. While a vial of vaccine could expire, that's an entirely different thing than an animal's immunity from a vaccination expiring. So we've long known that immunity to viruses persists for years, if not the life of an animal. That's from Dr. Ron Schultz's work, who, by the way, he recently passed away this year. So thank you for all of the incredible work you did, Dr. Schultz. It's a mistaken idea to think a one-year rabies vaccine will only establish 1 year's worth of immunity. It's also old news that the 1 year and 3 year rabies vaccines are the same stuff. One lot was studied for a year, the other for 3, and the vials labeled accordingly. Either is likely to establish immunity well beyond their label claims. Revaccination based on that spurious misunderstanding would be a huge disservice to dogs, regardless of origin. Drawing another titer is fine, but not after a booster vaccination. Any positive titer or antibody level inherently means a vaccine will not boost anything and be 100% risk without benefit. And
Right.
so Dr. Lori Kozier has been chiming in here, which I absolutely love. And you guys, if you have not listened to her episode earlier this year on the Pet Parenting Reset, she was kind enough to sit down with me and do a full hour long just about titer testing. Because there are so many questions about it. Please, please, please go back and listen to that episode. And she says the Rabies Challenge Fund established duration of immunity of 5 to 6 years, depending on product. So that is some of our very passionate veterinarians can get carried away, like Dr. Will Falconer, and say potentially for the life of the animal. But as far as we know from study, at least 5 to 6 years, as Dr. Kozier is saying, depending on the product.
Well, I will say this. I'm actually encouraged to see that they allow the 2 and 3 year vaccinations for these imported dogs, because there are states in
They
the
do.
United States that require an annual vaccine, and it's the same exact vaccine as the 3 year, and that's how we're over vaccinating dogs in these states, because the law requires the annual vaccine, which protects longer than that, but they're having to get it every year, which is just.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that mine? My microphone. So Dr. Kozier says also, I have recently run into 2 to 3 dogs who had rabies certificates with no actual vaccines administered from foreign countries. That does not surprise me, but at the same time, I want to be like Joe Rogan and be like, that's wild.
I mean, that's the thing about this. Another thing that I will say, having lived abroad in certain places, that I mean, a lot of this can be fudged. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, like, yes, we're trying so hard to make sure that everybody's protected, that we're doing the right thing. But whomever wants to get away with something is going to find a way to get away with something. So, like, yeah, I mean,
Well, just like you were saying, bring them into Mexico and then bring them into the US because Mexico's not on that list. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I can only imagine people, especially because it's like a photocopy of a certificate, and like I mean, with technology today, like how hard is
Yeah.
it?
By the
Where are they
way,
going
I
to
don't mean I
verify?
don't mean to say like do that. I don't
No,
mean to
no,
say do
exactly. No, no.
that.
We're
Don't do
not
that.
promoting a way around this. We're just
No.
saying that the people who this is the thing about, and I think we talked about this when I was in Spain. Remember that they had just passed a law about like not being able to tie their dogs out, and like the responsible people who like let their dogs like, who were like going to like a place that you could literally buy and see your dog and it's right there and the dog's socialized and it's been doing this its whole life. Those people were affected, but the people who aren't going to follow the law aren't going to follow the law. The people who don't
Yes.
take good care of their pets, the people who don't care about the other pet, the person who has a reactive dog and doesn't care if it eats another dog, those people aren't going to be affected by this because they're not going to listen. They're going to find a way around it. It's usually the responsible people who are law abiding citizens who are going to be the ones who have to jump through hoops here. So the sketchy peeps are always going to are always going to be the sketchy peeps. They're always going to find a way around it. And those are the people who probably are the ones who are the ones who will risk bringing a dog that shouldn't come.
Yeah.
Those people are
Well,
going to do whatever works for them and screw the rest of the community.
yeah. Well, it was just like this morning. So, okay, I went to urgent care today, you guys. And I'm
But
happy
let
to
us
tell
know that
that
you're fine.
I
You're
am
fine.
I am
Okay,
totally fine.
good.
Well, I'm mostly fine. I am in pain, but I'm fine. So there was a sign on the glass that was like, no fighting, no argue. Like, first of all, if somebody is in your waiting room waiting to be seen by a doctor, let's be real, it's a PA that you're going to see. You're not going to see a doctor, but anyway, and they're like breaking out, like fighting. I don't know what they're doing. They're high. I have no idea. Like you're just going to break out into a fight in the waiting room of a medical building. Like you're not reading the sign, going, "Oh, never mind. I'm not going to fight you now." Like,
Yeah, the people who are fighting in public are not all there. They're definitely not worried about the sign.
but
They
it's the
know it's
same
wrong to
thing.
fight in public.
Yeah,
They're
like
still doing it.
it's the same thing. People that follow laws, and people that don't follow laws don't follow laws. They're not just going to start following rules and
Exactly.
laws just because they're like, "Oh, you mean you just put this one there? Let me go ahead and abide by this one." No, that's not going to happen.
And then there, like Healthy Dog Workshop continues saying that, it's important to remember that rabies vaccine is a killed vaccine that does not confer the long duration of immunity that modified live vaccines do. And again, also which vaccines? Where are we getting
Yeah.
them? Were they stored properly? All those questions. And if we're looking at countries where the standard of care is so low,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm surprised we're even letting these dogs in. To be honest with you, like even with these new regulations, like because there's
Well,
so many unknowns
I
about where
know.
they're coming from.
And I mean, I'm such an animal lover that I do have that like part of my heart that is just like tugging at like all of the animals around the world that need help, that need rescue. And I try to remind myself like there are so many animals here in our country that need help and need rescue. And like that doesn't mean that other animals don't need help. It just means that as an individual, like I can only do so much. And you as an individual can only do so much. And so like God bless those people that go into other countries and do this work. We just may need to find alternatives to be able to help these animals, and the answer may not be to bring everyone and their mom into the U.S.
Preach. I agree with you 100%. One of the best lessons my mom ever taught me was charity starts at home. We help around us in our home, in our community before we help abroad. And I grew up in Ecuador, which is a country that is right now just wrecked by violence and economic uncertainty. It's terrible, and it has been for a long time. It's worse now than ever, unfortunately. But we helped in Ecuador when we were there, and we always, if I was raising funds for something at school in Miami, it was always like, oh, like if we had stuff we can send to Ecuador, we would, because that's just charity starts at home. And Now that I'm in El Paso, am I like volunteering and helping in Northern Virginia where I used to live? No, I'm, keeping it in El Paso. And like, that's really, if everybody starts to worry about their community and keeping things local, I feel like everything kind of, it does do good for the world. Obviously, there are people who live near, like I'm in Seattle right now, like Canada's right there. So those people are affected by these things. I mean, like, mm, you know, and it happens to people too. Like my little nephew is on a visitor's visa, so because he's from Spain and we can't go to Canada this trip, right? Because like it's complicated and like he's undergoing some immigration stuff because his mom is an American citizen. So like we're not trying to like get in trouble by like, take him out of the country and then it looking sketchy. So like you have to like know that these things do happen for humans, for pets, like international law is international law and different standards of care require different, you know, verifications, certifications, and accountability. And that's just kind of how it goes when you're interacting internationally. I mean, right now, technology makes it really easy to talk to somebody in Spain, but it's not that easy to just like move there and take your
Yeah.
pets there, do all those things there. So you have to remember that everybody has their priorities and everybody's going to look out for number one because charity does start at home. So the United States is going to worry about the United States where Canada's going to worry about Canada.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but it also, like we were talking about earlier, kind of makes it to where, and we can push for change. Like these regulations haven't gone into effect yet, but
it goes into effect August 1st of
August,
2024, guys.
yes, August 1st, 2024. But like Dr. Kozer was saying, somebody going over the line into Canada for a dog show, or but any of these countries like Canada, places in Europe, New Zealand, Australia, who have done the same things we've done here to get rabies under control. Why can't we have different standards for countries like that and have it, evaluate it, have it scheduled to be evaluated to make sure everything is still up and up, and that other countries can join that list if they do the same.
Yeah, exactly.
But that really would make more sense. But somebody's asking for what the guidelines are, so I'll just repeat those again really quickly for anybody who's just joining us. So requirements starting August 1st, 2024 to bring animals into the United States, or dogs specifically, into the United States. They must be at least 6 months or 180 days of age at the time of entry into the U.S., examined by a licensed veterinarian in the country of export and found to be in good health and free of infectious disease, internal parasites, and external parasites, vaccinated for rabies by a licensed veterinarian at least 30 days before the date of entry into the United States. The dogs must have been at least 84 days of age at the time of vaccination. The vaccination must be current at the time of arrival. 2 and 3 year vaccines are acceptable. However, if the expiration date of the vaccination is not available, a 1-year validity is applied. The 30-day wait does not apply to dogs who were previously vaccinated for rabies after at least 84 days of age without a lapse in rabies vaccination status. Once they get into the U.S., they have to be vaccinated for distemper, hepatitis, parvovirus, parainfluenza, and leptospirosis within 12 months of entry. They have to be accompanied by a health and rabies vaccination certificate issued in English by a veterinarian with a valid license to practice veterinary medicine in the country of export, and then all of the things that have to be listed on it. And they have to be accompanied by a valid import permit issued by APHIS Animal Care. Yeah, that's very true. Think of the Canadian-US border, how much wildlife is bringing rabies from one side to the other. Well, and that's the thing, is where, so we mostly have it controlled in our pet population, but it's still out there in the wild, like we were talking about earlier. So think of how much wildlife is bringing rabies from one side to the other. Realistically, how many owned dogs are going to bring rabies into the country in comparison? I completely agree with that statement.
I completely agree with that. Being on the border with El Paso, we have Yeah, we at any point we can get some kind of rabies outbreak. Easy, easy, easy.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I will say that if you go to the CDC importation website, it's cdc.gov/importation. You can choose to read all of the details, and it's based. So the new requirements separate dogs into different categories. So like based on where they were 6 months before they're entering the United States. So it's like that 6 month period before they enter the United States and where they received their rabies vaccines. So it's like there are all dogs fall under one certain requirement, and then there's dogs that fall under different requirements based on where they're coming from, how long they were there, and where they were vaccinated. So it is a complex thing, like for you're a layperson. But if you are not really traveling outside the U.S. with your pet, it doesn't really affect you in any way, shape, or form. But
Yeah.
again, like as a military spouse, I know that that doesn't apply to everybody. Um, and
Well, and Dr. Kosher brings up a really good point, which my conspiracy theory prone mind just went wild on. She says, and why are we requiring Leptovax required after importation, which is a vaccine even AVMA considers non core? So I will say, and this is just this, there is no basis in reality on what I'm about to say. I'm going to put that
I'm gonna
out there for
doubt
you.
that. I'm gonna say that I highly doubt that there's no basis in reality. You can't prove it,
I
maybe, but there's
can't prove it,
probably a
but
basis in
my
reality.
conspiracy theory prone mind is like, I wonder if the pharmaceutical company that is making the lepto vaccine is like, you know what? I want to sell more of these. So let's get this started here, and then we'll kind of slowly transition it into a core vaccine and try to, continue to like see here, AVMA, here, even the CDC said like that's where my mind spirals to.
I mean, I think that every vet that I've gone to has strongly pushed lepto. So I think that
Yeah,
whomever is pushing the reps that are pushing the
yeah,
lepto vaccine are
yeah.
doing so effectively. And obviously, the CDC has consultants that are, veterinarians, and they probably have been, convinced that
Yeah.
lepto is a hugely important core vaccine, even if the AVMA doesn't think so. Because I've
Mhm.
never met a vet that wasn't like, you really should get it. And I'm like,
Well, even I want to say it was like the year before I moved from San Diego to Texas. Um, my vet sent out like this mass email to all of her clients about getting the lepto vaccine. And so I don't remember if I called her or if I went into the office for something else. And I was like, why would I do that? And she was like, you don't need to. And I'm like, the way my vet talks to me is not the way she talks to
yeah,
everybody else that walks into the
yeah,
office. She's like, you don't
yeah,
need
yeah.
to. I'm like, I know I don't need to, but I'm wondering why you sent this email.
Well, look, um, uh, Healthy Dog Workshop, LOL, conspiracy theaters. You should see the ads in vet mags for the Leptovax. And yes, I mean it has to be like they're being because I mean I just feel like everywhere I've gone, every vet has made it seem like it had to happen or else. And I've never really done it outside of their early years because I know enough to know that they probably had immunity and that they were okay without it, but they do push that shot a lot. So I think it is headed for the core vaccination list. I definitely do feel like it's headed there.
I mean, if it does, you heard it here first.
I
No,
definitely feel
I'm
like that's where
kidding.
it's
I'm
going.
totally kidding.
But we did have a really good discussion about rescue versus importing dogs versus,
Yeah.
and that's such a personal opinion, and I think it really is regional too. Like I'm in El Paso, we definitely don't need any more pets coming in from outside of the U.S. We are at capacity. Our shelter's not taking anymore. We have pets being dumped every single day. We have a lot of education to do in the El Paso area on proper pet parenting, responsible pet parenting. We have a huge issue with the financial aspect of pet parenting. that is ignored at the beginning, and then obviously when something comes up, people are just dumping their pets in the shelter or on the street because they can't deal with it. El Paso is not a very wealthy city. Um, Lots of immigration there, lots of problems with immigration, as you all know, through the news. And it is, our migrant crisis is a problem in El Paso, no matter what side you lean on. So we have a lot of internal issues that make it so that pet parenting isn't necessarily at where it should be. So do I want to see like fancy German shepherds or being bred somewhere else and bringing in or whatever, enter whatever breed you want? No, I don't want to see that. And do I want to see, pets being saved from the French Antilles or, South Korea from, whatever horrors that they're experiencing there? No, I don't really want to see that coming to El Paso because we have our own issues, right? So like it's really a personal thing. And I think for me personally, I'm not against breeding at all. I think that there is a place for breeding, absolutely. I support ethical breeders, especially those that breed service animals. I mean, there's just so many reasons I know that breeding has to exist, and I have no problem with that. But for the general population, I obviously feel like, I'm always going to go for charity starts at home, and let's control the homeless pet population before we start bringing anybody from abroad. But obviously, there are exceptions to what I just said because this will affect people in like a niche group. And what we do here is just bring these things to your attention so that if you are one of those groups, you are aware that there may be something that has changed since you maybe last deployed and are trying to bring in a pet, if that's something that you do on deployment,
Mhm.
service. But yeah, so just be aware that these things are taking effect August 1st. My sister, for example, the next time she comes from Spain with her dog is going to have to look at these new mandates and see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so it was, I don't want to say it was culture shock because it wasn't. I'm from Virginia. So there were always, I mean, every single day there's a crisis in one of the shelters. I got a little spoiled, I guess, in San Diego. Never had a crisis at the San
Yeah.
Diego Humane Society,
Northern Virginia was always such a
right?
great place. Yeah.
And I know, and so now that I'm here, I'm in Georgetown, Texas. The Georgetown shelter is, I mean, it is like triple over capacity. It is horrible, and I feel horrible. I mean, I know personally, I'm above my max capacity at the moment. I would love to go
Yeah.
out and adopt
Me
all the
too.
animals, but I know when I adopted Kim in San Diego, I got pushback from people because she was rescued and pulled from Mexico. And I'm like, look, I didn't seek to adopt a dog from Mexico. I had contacted like 8 different rescues, and this was the only rescue that contacted me back. Like I
Hmm.
was just trying to give a dog a home. And this was the only rescue that contacted me back. And I mean, what am I supposed to do? Like that's what the universe said. The universe
Yeah.
brought this
Yeah.
dog to me.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah. Yeah.
say that I
Yeah.
was trying to pull a dog out of my, like that wasn't my goal. And I did have people that were like, unfollow. I'm just not gonna support that. And I'm like, that's fine. Like that's your decision.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to put a dog in my
Yeah,
home,
exactly.
right?
No, and I think it's such a personal thing. Like we can't tell people what's more important, like controlling animal populations, keeping breeds alive, you know, we can't tell them what's more important because everybody's life experience and pet parenting style and preferences are going to impact what they think is more important. It's just a matter of really with these new like new laws, rules, regulations, you just need to know that if it is affecting you, plan ahead, make sure that you do your research, give yourself time, don't just assume it's all going to work out because the last thing you would want is to be separated from your pet trying to come back to the United States for an extended period of time. I
Yeah.
know how hard it is to travel back and forth sometimes internationally. So just know what is going on, understand it, call the CDC, ask for reference, ask for information, talk to your veterinarian.
Mhm.
especially if you're abroad, make sure that that veterinarian is recognized. The last
Yeah.
thing you want is to go to some like, run of the mill veterinarian that, doesn't have what they need and doesn't take the precautions, and then you're stuck not being able to come back to the US. So just educate yourself if this applies to you. And if not, thanks for joining us and listening to us, even though it doesn't affect you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it may one day if
Exactly.
they make core
Yeah.
vaccine, they increase what's already on the list of core vaccines, or but I mean, you don't ever know. And I mean, somebody watching us right now could fall in love with a military man tomorrow and then never knew that their life was going to be.
Call me. Call me. I'll talk you out of it. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, my first one was too. I get it.
The
But
military
yeah,
life is not for everybody, but we do need
no,
to support the military,
yeah,
especially the soldiers that have deployed and seen combat and lived through just such trauma. And if they connected with a pet, a dog abroad, and this is just for dogs, guys. That's why we're only talking about dogs. This legislature, this law that's going into effect August 1st of this year is just about dogs. And, we need to support the people who really need to bring these dogs in, and we need to focus on the ones that are here already before we bring in more. And that might be at the core of this new regulation. That might be at the core of it, being like, we're at capacity with dogs. We need
yeah,
to maybe
maybe.
make people jump through some hoops before bringing some from abroad. And I don't disagree with that in a general term, in a general sense, I guess.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I mean, obviously, my heart goes out to every single animal that is in some form of abuse or neglect around the world. Like, my heart can't hold it at all. But like, it's like when you're in an airplane and they tell you to put your oxygen mask on first, right? Like, you can't help anybody else if you're passed out. And that's where, and granted, some of us are in situations where we don't see this going on in our country, but especially in like more populated and, well, I want to say higher population areas that maybe are not super high income, like the really, really high income places probably don't have these huge
No,
issues.
the DMV, Northern Virginia. I mean, we were some of the most expensive zip codes in the country, right, in that area. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like you don't worry as much about the pets there, because they probably, those that are in a shelter will go to a beautiful home and have a beautiful life. So, yeah, it is those lower socioeconomic level people, communities that you obviously understand. Like, they
And
don't have
there's
the
more of
resources.
them. There's
Yeah,
more of them than
exactly.
the high income
And
areas.
they don't have the resources. It's not about what they don't want to do or what they
Right.
do want to do. It's about that they don't have the resources, and the cities don't have the resources. I will say that at the end of every yoga class that I teach, I have a little mantra that I say, and it's, may all the creatures of the universe be happy. May all the creatures of the universe be at ease. May all the creatures of the universe be free, be free, be free. And that's really all we can put out to the universe when we have no control over what other countries are doing for the pets, the dogs, the cats, the strays, all the types of strays. Because I mean, in other countries, I remember we had stray sloths in Ecuador. Um, so depending on whatever animal it is that's there, we can only just hope that education gets to that area and that we do better every day by the pets or the creatures of the world, of the universe, because they deserve it. But there's nothing we can do from over here. So just protect your pet if you are traveling or if you plan on coming back. And a lot of people are from the United States but have family elsewhere. So if they do have a family pet that they want to bring in, those are the people who are going to be most affected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I don't think we could say anything else more perfect, so we might as well just end it.
Thank you guys for joining us.
Yes, thank you
I
for
hope
being here.
I hope the jazz music wasn't too loud. It was pretty good, right? It was okay.
Yeah, it was
Okay,
pretty
good.
good.
They kind of, I don't know if it was just luck, but it didn't seem so loud anymore. But thank you guys for joining us. We will be back on Monday. And if you have any recommendations or topics you want us to discuss, and always thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Kosher, for all your input. We really appreciate you being here. And we thank you for joining us whenever you do. It really is nice to see that, we can have these discussions and we can discuss it with you too, not just me and Jessica.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate every one of you, and especially you, Dr. Kosher, for all of your input. And we'll see you guys on Monday.
Bye, guys. Have a great rest of the
Bye.
week. Bye.